Welcome to the first webinar in the HERDSA series on the theme of supporting and sustaining a community of online practice in higher education. It is great to have you participating today. My name is Sarah Hatton. I'm a Program Director at the University of South Australia and I'm the SA Branch Chair. I would like to first acknowledge I'm on Kaurna land and pay my respects to the Kaurna people's spiritual relationship with their country. I also acknowledge the diversity of Aboriginal peoples, past, present and future. From all of us at HERDSA, we hope that everyone has been keeping well and managing the distinct changes that have occurred to our working and personal lives due to COVID-19. As a collective, the HERDSA exec shared the concern about how to support HERDSA members through these unusual times. This series of webinars aims to provide knowledges about best practice approaches to online teaching, as well as the opportunity to connect with each other. The topic of today's webinar is Enabling Online Education, Access, Engagement and Innovation in Digital Spaces, presented by Senior Lecturer Jennifer Stokes from the University of South Australia. Jennifer is an award-winning educator who specialises in digital media and enabling pedagogy, and her presentation will provide useful strategies for supporting students access and engaging students through online learning. Before I hand over to Jennifer, I'd like to just request that we keep our microphones muted throughout the presentation and post any questions you have in the chat for Jennifer to respond to in the Q&A. Jennifer's presentation will be for approximately half an hour, leaving the remaining time for Q&A. I'd also like to let you know the webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the HERDSA website later this week. Finally, I'd like to make a special mention and thank you to Jennifer Ungaro for her work in promoting the webinar series via the HERDSA website, and to our President of HERDSA, Denise Chalmers, for her support. Please keep your eye out for future promotion of upcoming webinars. Thank you again for participating today, and I will pass over to Jennifer for her presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. And it's great to see a lot of familiar faces and familiar names out there today and some new people as well. So hello, it's nice to meet you and I hope that you find this a valuable presentation. I would also like to acknowledge that this presentation takes place on Kaurna land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So what we're looking at today is around enabling online education, access, engagement and innovation in digital spaces. I won't give you too much more of the details of my background and resume, except to mention a couple of highlights so you know that I'm coming to this from a position of authority. I've created online content which has been taught in both national and international spaces. I used to do some teaching across to Singapore as part of our documentary production Bachelor of Media Arts at UniSA, as well as I was a developer and course coordinator for the core course in every UniSA online degree. When UniSA was set up recently, I was seconded over to that position, and I'm proud to say I've won 5 teaching citations for excellence in teaching since 2008, both national and institutional citations. So this is going to be bringing together a bunch of the different learnings that I've had over the last almost 20 years that I've been working in this space. And I'm going to try and frame it in a way that is about presenting some problems and challenges and looking to solutions, because I thought hopefully that's going to be the most helpful for you today. If you do have some questions as we go along, as Dr. Hatton said, please pop them into the chat box and at the end we'll have time for Q&A. So without further ado, this is the type of research question that I'm thinking about here. In facing the unprecedented challenges of COVID-19, how can we best support students to transition to online study? And I thought one of the ways we could look at this and discuss this is through using a Padlet tool. We've got a large community here. I can see over 61 people are currently accessing this presentation and listening along. So what I'd really like to do is to get people to also engage, because I think that's really core to working as a community of learners together. So there may be some specific challenges that you're having in your context. There may be some things that you see when people post on the Padlet. So I should say, please either use the QR code to be able to jump into the Padlet and see what's on there, or you can put in the URL, which is at padlet.com/Jenny_Stokes/online teaching. Once you do that, you'll be taken through to this Padlet. And the idea with a Padlet is that it's, some of you may be familiar with these and using these already, but they're kind of a live mind mapping or an idea generation tool. So if you can connect to the Padlet, you can use this little plus here, you can add a post, you can add some ideas, you can add comments. If you pop some challenges up there, I'll try and come present some solutions as well. If they don't come through in this presentation, we'll also share this again later to HERDSA members when we share the recording. So if people can jump onto that Padlet and use the little plus sign to add some posts as we go along through this session. So again, the QR code's there, or you can just type in padlet.com, Jenny_Stokes online teaching. Sarah, would you mind sharing that link via the chat box, please, as well? Thank you. Okay, so we're in this really unusual, and I think we need a better synonym for unprecedented, it seems to be the word being used all the time, space, where we've got the context of COVID-19. Some people might be speculating about who might be behind it and what's happening with COVID-19. And there's a question about how can we actually do productive things in this space, that we're not just creating memes, that we're actually using this as a time to push forward technologies and agendas around online learning, telehealth, all those sorts of spaces. I think we'll see a big leap forward. Some of the existing challenges, we know that there are challenges that exist for students coming from equity groups toward higher education already. We know there are challenges around technological access, having the tools and the internet access to be able to connect online, that there may be external pressures operating and different time pressures as well. There is also the question of the study environments that people are connecting to online study via. Then there's a raft of new challenges that are being thrown at us. This rapid move to online learning for all, rather than for the students that have selected to learn in this way and in this space. That there's really been no time to test prior to moving online. So for us at UniSA, it was a very rapid move into the online space for all of our teaching. I'm sure it's similar for people across the country. So some of us are lucky and have some external content we've already been using, but to have that big shift and to move all of our students into this space partway through a teaching semester is extremely unusual. There's the physical and mental health impacts of isolation. And this is not just for our students, but for ourselves as well. How is this going to impact on things like our teaching and I guess our senses of well-being and health? We've got these strange new things emerging, things like Zoom bombers. And then the issues like data limits and old devices. So things that may be for our students, it may be for us, and there may be all sorts of other challenges. So please do pop them up on that Padlet as I'm talking through this presentation. I guess what this brings me back to the idea of is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as we know, reflecting back on this old and established model, we're usually trying to work our way up that pyramid, and we're trying to get to those steps of self-actualization where we can have those real learning experiences. We're very comfortable with identity and we're able to create things and innovate. But we've been kind of smashed down to that base level of thinking about our physiological needs and our personal safety in this time. So we've got this really complex tension interacting between what we're trying to have occur and the outside external reality for most people. We also have this challenge that additional technology can create further hurdles to learning. And in this presentation, I guess I'm kind of framing it as though there's these three hurdles. So first we need that first hurdle of access to be dealt with. Then we need to work on engagement before we can actually get to that point of the learning really occurring. So how can we use effective design to minimize this issue and to leap over those hurdles into that success of learning? So as an overview of today's presentation, what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to provide some overarching strategies for supporting student access and engaging students through online learning. Then I'm going to talk about a couple of design-based approaches that I use in my teaching and have found have been really helpful. Then work through some of the challenges and some of the solutions around access, engagement, and then even perhaps innovation within this space. I've included crisitunity, which is a Simpsons quote, that idea that within a crisis, we may also find opportunity. Then a few final tips and tools and a conclusion. So a bunch of stuff to work through in this time. I'll move through it pretty quickly and we'll have question time at the end. So some of the overarching themes and ideas, reflecting back on my experience in this space, what I've read and a lot of the other wonderful information that's coming forward at this time. Firstly, trying to aim to design for access and inclusivity, because if you're using that as an early design principle, then you're preemptively tackling a number of the issues that could come forward and cause challenges otherwise. And when we design for access and inclusivity, a lot of what we do there to support students with diverse needs actually ends up supporting all students because it's good teaching practice. It's important to know your students and to use dialogue as a tool here, whether that's actual sort of spoken dialogue, whether it's text-based communication, to have that interactivity to get a real sense of what the challenges are that they are facing and then how we can work to support them through that. Have a real focus on connection. So how are you connecting with the students? How are you seeing that they're connecting? What kind of outputs are they generating as well? And working to build a community of learners in a kind of ideal way so that you're all supporting each other and learning together. I find it's really helpful to provide students with opportunities to show their learning in every session and every interaction. So I'll talk more about how I do that, and also follow up if they disappear. And I've found, particularly around the teaching break, a number of students just having that little bit of activity, that bit of you reaching out, brings them back when they're kind of hovering on, do they stay or do they go in this complex time? I should also say, if they disappear, many of us may have quite large courses, and there's a growing amount of tools with learning analytics that we can use to conduct personalised contact in ways that are manageable at scale. Then a couple of things that I think I try to use in terms of framing my teaching, where there are opportunities. Can you make learning fun? And if you can, then that's going to be really powerful and motivating for the students. And can you turn this challenge into an opportunity for creativity? So sometimes when we have some constraints put forward to us, that's when we can develop really creative solutions. So a bit of a challenge there. So the first point, looking at design. There are two particular design-based approaches I'd like to talk about. The first one is enabling pedagogy, and this is an area I'm working on in my PhD research. It's drawing together some established pedagogical approaches, and particularly using them in the space of enabling education. So for students from equity groups who are new to the institution, what might be some of the best practice approaches to support them to engage, and also to strengthen the academy through the diverse capitals those students bring. So this is drawing on things like critical pedagogy from theorists like Paulo Freire and Ira Shaw, inclusive practices from people like Christine Hawkins, and transition pedagogy from theorists, people like Sally Kift, who are doing this really practical approaches within an Australian context. So I've been publishing around this since about 2014, and it's starting to gain traction across the nation, which is wonderful. There's been some really great work from University of Newcastle in this space as well. Then universal design for learning, and this picture that I've included, universal design for learning, some of you may already be very familiar with this and using it in your teaching. Essentially, the idea is that we're preemptively operating multiple means of access and representation. We're developing curriculum so that it's already accessible. So when students approach it, they've got multiple ways they can engage. A picture that I've shown here, which highlights how this works in architecture. This was actually a bridge in Uvascula in Finland. I was there for a conference a couple of years ago and thought this was a really nice example. So as people approach this bridge, you can see the person on the bike. So they're on a ramp. So someone perhaps who's in a wheelchair, has a pusher, is riding a bike or on a skateboard, can use the ramp. There were steps on the other side. There was a lift in the middle. So it's designed for access, and people can choose the point of access that suits them best to reach that same end goal. So the idea is we're taking that sort of concept and we're using that in an educational space. It focuses on three key areas: effective networks, recognition networks, and strategic networks. And I guess the key things are just these dot points down the bottom here. It's about multiple means of representation. So how is your information available? How can people connect with it? Multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. So these are two approaches I've particularly used in my teaching. Then how do we see that design in practice? Well, multiple modes. So when things are made available, are they available in different types of formats at a basic level? So have we got things in video format, perhaps with captions, that's also available as a text-based format, that there's different options there for different types of learners, and also learners who are accessing with different levels of data rates for their internet. So using inclusive and constructivist design, so valuing students' funds of knowledge. Our students, as we know, they're not blank canvases. When they come to us, they actually bring a lot of different knowledge and capitals. So how can we connect that with the types of learning outcomes we want from the course, so that we're actually strengthening things and it really resonates with the students as well? Then critical pedagogy using a dialogic approach, and particularly in a space like enabling programs, whereas that there is such sort of diversity of experience and knowledge base that the students come to the program with. This is super critical, but I think arguably for all students, every student is coming in having had a different experience. How do we actually get to know and understand where they're at, and to support them and motivate to have those really powerful learning experiences? And I really like this quote: "A dialogic approach encourages educators to very carefully negotiate the student's gradual construction of knowledge, every step of which had to advance just 1 inch beyond the learner's level of awareness. Dialogue was the only means by which teachers could really attune their didactic interventions to the student's cognitive level, precisely because dialogue allowed the students to set the pace of their learning." Obviously, we have particular goals and outcomes we're getting through the course, but this helps us to tune things so it works with the student. And a focus on deep learning outcomes and innovative practice. So access, this is our first hurdle we're working to jump over. So there's access questions. Firstly, at a base level, how does the student access your content, and how do you know? So this might be something that you could do an online poll, or you could literally ask the questions in a synchronous tutorial. You get a sense through some of the things that come up on Zoom as well as how they're accessing things. So is it through a mobile phone? Are they doing it through a laptop, through a desktop, through a borrowed device? That sort of thing. Important to be aware of. Is the content you're creating suitable for mobile use? Is it suitable for screen readers? Does it include plain text options so that people are able to work through it in different ways? And a really good baseline, I think, is to be aware of W3C compliance. So this is the World Wide Web Consortium, and they provide accessibility guidelines which can be helpful reminders about the types of things that you want to have there for access reasons and inclusivity. So things like captions for videos, alt text for images, that sort of stuff. Just really good accessible web practice. Do you support synchronous and asynchronous learning? So usually for me, my external teaching has been asynchronous. It's been at times that work for the external students to work through the activities, and I would have drop-in consultation as a synchronous option. But a big shift for me under COVID-19 has been to be running synchronous tutorials with my internally enrolled students as a way to do these things online. So you can work out how those different things interact. I've also opened up the offer for any of the external students to attend a synchronous tutorial, and for the students who are meant to be in the synchronous tutorials to do the asynchronous content if there are any issues for them at the time of their usually scheduled tutorial. Interestingly, the external students haven't really taken up the option of synchronous learning, which I think probably speaks to why they've chosen to do the external learning anyway. During synchronous learning, how will you manage any tech issues? So if students are dropping out, or what happens if your internet sort of freezes or things fall over, how are you going to manage that? So preemptively thinking about a plan B is important. Can you experience the lesson from the student's perspective? That's always really helpful and can give you a sense of, I guess, the lived experience of the student learning. And then one of those really big questions, which fortunately there aren't too many students in this boat, but we do need to consider it. What about students who do not have an internet connection or suitable device at home? So at UniSA, we've been fortunate that the library has still been open during this time for a limited number of students to attend, but being aware of different options, and also perhaps from time to time taking that option that if students are disappearing, to call them via their landline or via their mobile phone number, just to check in. If they've disappeared for valid reasons, totally fine, but sometimes they need that connection through different systems to get them back on track so they can be aware of what's out there for them. So some of the access solutions, thinking about those multiple modes of representation as a fundamental design principle, looking at synchronous and asynchronous delivery and giving students the flexibility to move between those. Working to build a community of learners. So because as we're working through using these technologies together, sometimes things might happen. You might not be aware that maybe you're moving between multiple things and your mic is off, or that sort of stuff. If you've got trust in a community of learners, then they're going to give you feedback, and it's going to be that shared learning environment, and they'll be more generous and open to the discussions as well. In your first online lesson, share your expectations and the code of conduct, because this is a new space for some of the students. So just being aware that we're still at a university learning environment and what that means for them just helps guide them so that they know kind of what the engagement in the space, what's expected. Work to support students to learn in the way that best fits their technology access and learning styles. So with those multiple modes, you can then direct them to specific resources as these things come up as issues. And I think in this time, you see, it's such a challenge for all of us, just taking that moment to try to be kind to, I know we hear this bit around the place, but be kind to yourself and be kind to the students, be generous where possible within the bounds of policy, provide ways to catch up on any content missed and regular opportunities for students to speak with you. Be ready to shift formats if issues arise, and for example, moving say from Zoom to a phone call or that sort of stuff, being able to shift between things. So you've always got that plan B option. Okay, so hopefully we've managed to get them all online and connecting with things. What kind of questions might there be around engagement? So how do you build trust from the first session? So an important question there to think about. And sometimes quite challenging as well when as an educator you might be looking at a Zoom gallery that's full of people's names, that people aren't turning their cameras on. I think it's important to think about it from the student position, that it might be that has to do with them using less data. It might be there's issues of things around privacy or things in their home environment that they don't feel comfortable broadcasting to a group that they don't necessarily know very well. It may also be that there may be some levels of anxiety around being on camera. I think it's important not to see that as a standoffish thing, but just as something that you go, okay, what are they comfortable working with? Some of them are super comfortable in the space. For example, I have one lovely student in one of my tutes who very sadly her end of program reward was going to be to go to Europe on a sort of trip of a lifetime, and then that's now been cancelled. So every tutorial we have, her backdrop is one of the places she would have visited on that tour of Europe. So we got to see the Northern Lights as her backdrop in yesterday's evening's class. So if you've got some trust and they know the rules, they can have a bit of fun with it as well. How does the student know they're a valuable part of the learning community and know that they would be missed if they're not there? How do students show they're learning in every session? Then really big picture design question, have you constructively aligned course content with the outcomes? Is this scaffolded through learning activities, and is the purpose of each assessment clear? So hopefully you have done these things, but sometimes in the online environment you might need to more clearly articulate that for the students so they understand how the scaffolding of the weekly tasks builds towards the things they're being assessed on, builds towards those course outcomes and them attaining them. Then are there support resources available for students? Do they know how to access this? Is that something that they can connect with easily? So some of the engagement solutions, working to build trust through dialogue. Again, dialogue super critical. This quote from Shaw and Frere, the educators may adopt the dialogic method to better understand their students' lived experiences and thus inform situated teaching, which is going to be more meaningful. So epistemologically, it is possible by listening to students speak about their understanding of their world to go with them towards the direction of a critical scientific understanding of their world. So building trust in that way is a really strong starting point. It builds understanding and it really just helps with that sort of collective identity too. Aim to design assessments to encourage deep learning outcomes. So if where possible, if you can make that real connection with students' motivations and passions, then it's going to help them to be motivated to continue working on the assessment, even in these complex, external, challenging times. Where possible, offer elements of choice. And that's empowering for the students. It also helps to create more interest for them. Some courses I understand will have more flexibility with this than others, but even some flexibility around perhaps their final assessment delivery or topic choice. In my digital literacy course, the students have 6 different modes usually that they can present their final assessment in, and everyone designs a digital artifact that resonates with the degree they're moving towards, as well as to a niche they can see needs to be addressed. So that's a huge amount of flexibility. Not everyone is able to do that. So see where you can put in elements of choice. Select examples which resonate and fun activities where possible, because it is about keeping them engaged, and you can do this in multiple ways. I've got an example there, Future Dreaming. So this is a VR documentary with Aboriginal students designing content for their imagined futures. So a really interesting example, both in terms of technology and different cultural resonance, diverse cultural resonance, and then fun activities. So for example, in this week we've been looking at gaming through a lens of genre theory. So the students are taking kind of a theoretical framework and then applying it to something that's fun, and then doing group analysis, feeding that back to the group. So then they're having to show the way that they've thought about these things, but it's done in quite a fun context with a sort of nostalgic gaming spin to keep them engaged. Aim high. I think this is important, and I love this quote from Tinto, that high expectations are a condition for student success, low expectations a harbinger of failure. Simply put, no one rises to low expectations. So if you set that bar high, often you'll see that students even work to clear and improve on that. So it's really motivating for them. Include group work in each session with a clear public learning outcome. So really important for the students to have these connections to peer networks, and that's been talked about in some of the other great webinars that have been happening during this time. Things like the ones presented by the National Centre and AWST have talked about some of those. I think that clear public learning outcome is important. If you've built that trust, then the students will be forthcoming with that. But the trust needs to be there before they'll be willing to share in that way. Things like with my tutorial groups, the discussion board is locked down to the people that are within that tutorial. So it's public within our learning community, not broadly public. Provide opportunities for students to make small talk before class starts, and individual opportunities to discuss assignment and coursework. So even though the teaching starts at 10 past, I'm always online at the start of the hour, and then I spend 10 minutes there with the students, just having a general chat. It's also a time for them to ask questions about things related to the course, talk more broadly about how things are going for them. And sometimes if they don't have many questions or things to talk about, we might look at a video clip or something like that, just something engaging. I also always do roll call in my synchronous Zoom sessions. So of course I can look at the participants list, but having that simple action where you've learned the students' names is also important, but use an Excel spreadsheet to check them off, to go around and say hello to each of them and ask them how they are. It's simple things like that that help to keep people engaged with the community. Work to be brave and model working with digital tools. The students will be understanding if you show that you're using these tools because you're using them to extend engagement and to work forward and take ideas forward. So some of the tips and tools of things that I find really helpful to use, things like having really detailed assessment rubrics online so that students can see, I'm sorry, this is quite tiny font out there, but they can see the criteria and they can see what helps them nail each level of that criteria. So I always say to them, you're aiming for that HD. So look at that. What do you have to do to meet that criteria? And then you can use online tools to mark those rubrics, provide individual comments as well, so they get thoughtful feedback, but really clear expectations are set for them before the point that they're even starting to look at their assignments or creating their assignments. One other thing that has been useful, and this has flowed on from some of the work we've done with UniSA Online, is thinking about giving some audio feedback. So for students who are out there in the external space, sometimes having that closer connection through a friendly voice that takes you through the assignment feedback is a useful way to go. It's not something code for everyone for everything, but it is worth thinking about perhaps judiciously applying. So for example, in my digital literacy course this semester, for any students that have failed their first assignment, we've provided audio and visual feedback through Panopto, so showing them where things are, where they could improve and how they can keep working forward for their next assignment. Then weekly guides, so making it really clear each week what students need to do. So I send out a weekly blast, you can see at the top there, usually with video content, very short, about a minute, capturing the highlights of what we're looking at that week and why it's important as we move towards the assessments, give them clear tips on important things to do that week and what they need to connect with. Also on my website, as you can see on the bottom left, this week is really clear in the center. And then as you can see on the bottom right, that then has clear steps that takes them through in particular activities, what they do before engaging with the learning activities, how they prepare, how they engage, then what they're expected to produce at the end. So I've used a kind of filmmaking framework for that because of the nature of my course, but you may find there's ways that speak to your discipline area that you can represent in that way. All of this stuff that's represented visually also has alt text, so if someone was going through that with a screen reader, they'd be able to have the text-based version. Using Padlets and live mind mapping. So these can be quite fun ways for students to do things as a community while they're online. A couple of examples there from students in Future Ideas at the top, doing online exploration of mod. And then this is from week 6 in my current digital literacy course, students doing collaborative brainstorming and idea generation online. And it was really charming after that activity. One of the students said, I really enjoyed that. That was actually, I really liked doing that. So it's great when you have that genuine and authentic feedback from the students as well during their class or in online. Gamification tools. So you might think about ways that you can keep students engaged through these. If they're working through the internet, it doesn't matter that you're remotely located. So we at UniSA, we're using things like Learning Catalytics. You can also use free tools like Kahoot. But just to do that sort of thing of keeping the students engaged in a kind of gamified way. And then thinking about learning analytics, and I think most institutions now probably have some learning analytics tools available to you. I've used things like Context as well. You can see that this was used in Future Ideas course for students to be able to share the themes that they were most interested in exploring as research ideas in there, because that's an information literacy course. But use learning analytics to get a better sense of your student cohort. Again, it's about that dialogue. And I guess ask yourself, what is your value add? So why should they learn from you and not from YouTube? Because that's, particularly for the generations going through now, that's a key learning tool for them. So what's the difference? What's the distinction? What do you bring to the table? Can it be fun? And would you like to learn in this way? If not, why not? If so, great. You know, hopefully it's at least speaking to one type of learner. So then just quickly in terms of innovation and that Simpson's idea, crisitunity, you know, in a crisis we may find opportunity. We can see that there's different spaces and tools now for dialogue and understanding, and we're entering the students' world. So as we go into a Zoom classroom, they're sharing their space with us as well. So that's shifting things, that's shifting dynamics, and I think can create some opportunities. You can see that it does enable innovation. So perhaps there's some tools you've been meaning to try out that you're now being kind of pushed into giving it a go. To give it a go, give it a try, see what works, see what doesn't. Just, I think as long as you're open and authentic with the students and you model how to cope when something doesn't work, then they'll go along for the ride, they'll bear with you. Always have a plan B though. Then you can see some of the stuff that we're bringing across as well in enabling education. Hopefully this is offering some best practice approaches for people with working with students from equity groups. And in some ways, I think all of our current students are being pushed into these challenging spaces, which resonate with some of the ideas that we've used to support students from equity groups over time. It's also enabling change. All of us are going to go through a significant growth in understanding of online learning and teaching during this time. It's just the nature of being pushed into this space, but it does give an opportunity to work to value those diverse capitals too. A lot of students have been in this digital space, they use it as a key space for connection, so they can bring learnings to the table in a community of learners too. I guess also just as getting close to the end, a note to think about that really, I think what's important here is the connection first and the technology second. So as long as you can maintain that connection and the students are there because they want to learn, that's why they're doing this course. It's really about how can we imagine ways to do this better. And I quite like J.K. Rowling's ideas around, you know, we carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better. All of you undoubtedly have been teaching in this space prior to this time. So how do we then make online learning this really powerful and positive learning experience for students more broadly? So in conclusion, I guess just the key takeaways: work to facilitate access through design. So keep that as a key principle in mind. Support students to engage and provide opportunities for connection. And the focus is on what the students learn. It's not what you're teaching. So if you're there and you're basically giving an online lecture and it's meant to be a synchronous tutorial, how do you know what the student's taking away from it? So the focus really needs to be on what are they generating as an outcome. Work to encourage those deep learning outcomes and look for opportunities in this crisis. I'm sure a lot of innovation will come out of it. So as we're looking to the future, I'll just jump back now and see how we've gone with the Padlet. Cool, so we've got a few people who've started mapping some stuff on there, which is great. Yeah, thinking about challenges. How do we move lab sessions online? Really, really good question. How do we work to do that? And one of my colleagues has done some really excellent work in terms of teaching science online. I'm sure there's lots of recommendations out there for the community if people would like to put some comments and feedback, and otherwise I'll come back in and I'll put some comments on this prior to it being shared by HERDSA. Thinking about student engagement, helping people feel okay about moving away from total control of their students' learning. That's a huge thing, like this shift towards this discursive environment that we've been seeing already through the design of some of the tutorial spaces. This is now sort of exploded because it really is a very democratic space, the online learning environment. I mean, there's still some top-down didactic stuff that's happening from us, but when we're in a Zoom class, particularly if students are in breakout rooms and we're just popping in and out, it's much more about what they're doing in those spaces. And I think at some level we just have to trust them, you know, that they're going to do their best, that we give them clear ideas, clear ways to engage, and we let them roll with it. Awesome. Yeah, it's certainly an issue when students are reluctant to turn on the camera, but I guess what we need to do is we need to be understanding about that and know that there may be deeper reasons for that, and that they may relate to issues of equity. So we just work with what we can, and hopefully they'll feel happy enough to turn it on over time. Online exam design principles, engagement. Yeah, I won't go through all of these right now, but I'll jump back in and I'll put in some comments before we share this via the HERDSA site. So those are my references for today. And I guess we move over now to time for questions. Sarah, I think you might have been collating some questions during this time.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That gave us so much to work with and think about in terms of you know, how we will connect and provide an engaging online experience, but also keeping at the forefront the issues of access. So thank you so much. Before Catherine Hill had to go to another meeting, she did post one question, which I've just put up again, and that's in regards to students that don't have access to the bandwidth. Yeah. You know, what would be some suggestions, which I think you have kind of explored.
Yeah, I think it's a really challenging question, but there are different solutions that we can give. Some is making sure that our material is there in ways that isn't as bandwidth heavy. So sort of text-based stuff, having things in formats that are downloadable, say as lectures, so that students are able to perhaps go to the university environment, even if they're not able to actually go into the campus, the Wi-Fi should still be active, and so then they can download their lectures and take them back home again. I think also not being judgmental if the students say, I can't do the synchronous tube, I'll just do what's available online for the asynchronous stuff, that may actually be to do with these issues of bandwidth rather than to do with what they want to do, giving them options to support them where they can. So one of my students in last night's class was actually at the library, and he got, because he knew the library was open, so he'd been able to go in there to use the internet there. I should mention another lovely colleague at UniSA College has been, I know, looking up suburbs and giving students tips on where Wi-Fi hotspots are in their area, so that the students can go and jack into those hotspots. So there's a lot of different approaches that we can take, but those are just some of the suggestions.
Excellent. So Jenny, are you happy to open it up to the floor?
Yeah.
The virtual floor for questions, if anyone wants to turn on their mic and ask a question.
Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll stop the screen share at this point. So okay, I can see there's a few sort of questions and comments in the chat box. So if people don't have any further questions, I might have a quick look at that and see what I can respond to.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for your presentation. It was fantastic. I just wanted to know what's your opinion on the online cohort sizes. You know, what could be a decent size in your opinion, to your experience, especially when it comes to all these challenges, you know, engaging students, you know, synchronous or asynchronous. Yeah, what's your opinion around that?
It's a really tricky question, because it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. It's sort of what are we trying to do with the cohort? So in the UniSA online course, I was involved with setting up and worked with a really great course facilitator and a team of tutors. That course, almost 1,500 people took that course over the year in 2018, and they were generally in sort of kind of tutorial cohorts of up to 60 people, but that was asynchronous learning. I think with synchronous learning, I would probably want to model it on a similar class size to what we would have as a standard tutorial class. Otherwise, I think you run a risk of it becoming so big that you can't have that sort of more, I guess, individualized relationship with the students to know what they need and where they're going. I think it would be hard with more than 25 students to have that, just based from my experience. I find even with, say, some of the tutes now, if there are 20 students that have accessed at that time, to be able to make sure you get time to speak with each of them individually as well can be a challenge. But it depends what you're getting them to do. So you may find that you can scale up with larger groups if they're doing group activities and a shared group output, that may work as well. So I probably, yeah, that would be my take on it, as a similar model to what a standard face-to-face tutorial would be in a sort of 2-hour delivery. But I think it depends on the content.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Jennifer. And just, have you received any feedback on the audio feedback that was provided to certain groups of students?
A bit of feedback from the students when I was doing the UniSA online work, which tended to be that they really appreciated that people had taken that time for them, and that they would then often start a conversation based on that as well, which I guess can risk generating some extra work, but it means they're connecting. So yeah, it was positively received from the students in the feedback that we got. The other thing I should mention, though, in terms of access, at that time it was an audio file, so we would always put in a comment for any students that may have had issues accessing the audio feedback to please contact us, and we would provide it in a different format. But now Panopto does the transcriptions or the captioning, so that issue is resolved. So again, just trying to think about any access issues before delivering that feedback in that format is worth doing.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions from the floor?
Hi, Jenny. It's Tracy Douglas here.
Hey.
from the University of Tasmania. There's somebody else did put in the chat box, I think, a question about online tutorials, which we obviously is a chance for us to engage with the students live. And we tend not to record them because we want to encourage the students to come. But what are your thoughts? Because obviously some students, you know, can't access for a variety of reasons. So do you think it is better to still record them and hopefully they'll still come to the live sessions?
Yeah, I would probably lean away from recording tutorials because I think you might lose a bit of the spontaneity in the space. So people behave quite differently when they know they're being recorded. It's sort of, my background is teaching documentary prior to coming to teaching and enabling programs. So I can see that there might be some validity in sharing that, but I think you would lose some of the kind of the spontaneity and perhaps the trust and dialogue with the students that are present in the tutorial, because they would be extra aware of that level of it being recorded and then disseminated afterwards. You might find if you've built trust with the group already and that you explain why it's being recorded, that they might be on board with that, but I'd probably give them the opportunity to vote on that, because you would hate for it to undermine the kind of positive dialogue that you've got going. If people are missing content, I'd probably look at other ways that they could connect with it, and I'd usually offer them the opportunity to attend any of the other tutorials during the week, or also to complete the asynchronous content. That tends to be the way I've resolved it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jenny. That's great. Thank you.
Hi, Mary Dracup here. Thanks very much, Jennifer. It was a really great presentation. I was wondering whether you could enlarge a little on the inclusive assessment methods that you use. You said you offer up to 6 different formats that students can submit in. I just wonder how you sort of look at things like equivalency and supporting the students to use the various formats, and also marking.
Yeah, really good questions. And so for me, sorry, I'm hitting my mic because I'm thinking. I've actually written a paper on this, and it's about inclusive design in digital literacy. So it was published in International Studies in Widening Participation Journal a couple of years ago. So in 2014, working with one of our academic developers, I did an audit of my information literacy course using UDL. And one of the takeaways from that was the way to use UDL really well is also to think about the assessment. And so when I created the digital literacy course, I put quite a bit of thought into how could that operate? How could these things be equivalent? How could someone generating a critical digital review be equivalent to someone creating an app, to an infographic, to other sorts of things? So I've actually created quite detailed criteria for each of the different formats. And so things like, for example, if a student is doing a critical review, they would have more formal research included, whereas if they're creating an app, a lot of the research comes through in them learning to use the software and delivering a functional app. So I had to think that through quite carefully in terms of how it would work, but I made sure that I did that prior to the point where students were being asked to do the assessment. So I tend to find, and I think one of the reasons I really like that Tinto quote so much is that if you set the expectations, if you're clear about them, the students rise to those expectations and go, okay, that's clear, I understand what I need to do. You provide them with some examples as well. So with that course, I taught it for the first time in 2015, and each year the quality of the student projects keeps going up because they can look at the examples, the technology moves further ahead, and that's also a good exercise for me because I'm constantly learning as well about all these technologies. So yeah, I just encourage you to Google kind of Stokes and digital literacy, and you should find that paper, and it goes into a fair bit of detail of how I actually did that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Welcome. And if you have any trouble finding it, feel free to email me as well. Any other questions?
Jenny, there was quite a bit of conversation around breakout rooms. Could you give us maybe some best practice or suggestions about how to make the most of the breakout room in the Zoom?
Yeah, sure. And I think there are some other people who are starting to share guides around this. So I can just tell you a few things from my experience. And I think there are probably other people who are also doing a fantastic job who might be able to share some stuff. So with breakout rooms, it depends how you want to approach it. I've at the moment just been putting students into it where they're automatically shuffled into groups. I tell them what they're going to be doing in the task very clearly, and I also have it on our discussion board for the tutorial so that they've got a written guide when they're in the breakout room. Usually we'll go through, say, a practice example. So in the gaming sort of game design and analysis this week introduction, we looked at an example. We did a very simple example of looking at Pong, so 1972 first arcade game. We looked at how we would apply this kind of critical approach, and we talked through how that would work. We gave that a go as a full class. Then I broke them into breakout rooms. They then have that support that they can look at. They know that they'll be coming back at a certain time as well. Then I jump into each of the breakout rooms as well. So I check that it's working okay and that the students understand what they're doing. And I guess you would usually do this in a classroom. You would look around the room and you would see that group's going really well, so I can leave them be, but this group's really quiet, so how do I go and kind of help to troubleshoot or work to kind of stimulate the discussion that, you know, they're meant to be having. So I do that, and I jump into between the breakout rooms. I'd usually go round once and check that everything's working okay for them and they're clear on what they're doing. And say if it was a 20-minute exercise, I might come back in at the 10-minute mark just to go, how are things working? Then after that, I'd use the broadcast system in Zoom to give them those hints of, yep, you know, you've got 5 minutes left, so please make sure that you're putting your post on the discussion board. That, you know, usually as well, I establish with my students this kind of practice where they take turns in their groups being a scribe, and they'll work in groups of 3 to 4, they'll explore an idea, and they're expected to post a response to the discussion board, and then they share it verbally with the group as well. They also know, because we've kind of established the rules around it, that this doesn't have to be perfect, that there is that level of trust that, you know, if there's a few typos or stuff, it's more about generating that information and having that record for them to go back to and reflect upon. Yeah, so then we come back out of the breakout rooms, we'd go around and one person from each group would talk to what their analysis was, and then I would usually do a kind of wrap up. So it's very similar to what I do in a tutorial. I'm just using those digital tools to be able to do that. Sometimes students end up, through various reasons, they might fall out of the breakout room, say something happened with their internet, and then they reappear in the broader room. So then I can pop them back into the breakout room they've dropped out of. Sometimes as well, if they have a question, they might come out of the breakout room and ask and then go back. So it's a fairly fluid sort of way of using things, but that's how I use the technology, similar to what I do in a class, a physical on-campus class. Yeah. Is there any other, sorry, I haven't had a chance to read all the way through the chat. Any other questions or themes, Sarah?
There's also quite a bit of conversation around tools like the Padlet, so or even the polling.
Yep.
So again, maybe if you could share some more insight to that, because yeah, there was quite a bit of chatter about that.
Okay, I guess the thing with those is just looking for where might there be some useful live tools that you can work with students, and I guess also give it a try if you feel so. When I use that Padlet tool for collaborative idea generation in breakout rooms in week 6, I had one class that there were just a few permission errors and things, and afterwards I was so frustrated, but then I went, actually they managed to achieve it. It's just a bit of frustration at my end. So it was a complex thing. They're trying to do collaborative idea generation online using another layer of technology, and charmingly the students also stayed around after that class for half an hour because they each wanted to have a chat with me about how they were going with their project. So I could tell that the students weren't kind of annoyed and disengaging, but that was just a good lesson and reminder for me that sometimes when using these technologies, you know, you need to double check things. You're hopping in and out of breakout rooms. It might require a little bit more. It does sometimes require a bit more tending than it would if we were physically, obviously, using pen and paper and in a face-to-face environment. but I found the students really like using Padlet. I've used it in lectures before as well. It's a great way to get some feedback from the students, again, getting that dialogue happening. You also, again, remind them that it's university context that they're posting things for. So it's okay to have a laugh and to share things, but I'm very clear that we follow the code of conduct. We would never do anything that's sort of racist, sexist, homophobic, any of that sort of stuff. So they know clearly how they use these different tools in professional ways. Yeah, and so basically with Padlet, what I would usually do, it's free to use. I shouldn't turn into an ad for Padlet. I'll just give you a very quick detail on it. So I think it's free for something up to like about 9 different Padlets, and then you can clear them off and reuse them. You can take a shot of the image of what's been created. So do that if you're reusing Padlet. Do that before you clear the Padlet off. When you create the Padlet, you can also create a link. You can create a QR code, which is what I did in our presentation today. Anything you can do to make it easier for people to access the technology is a good thing. Usually I would potentially also create a shorter URL. So you might use something like bit.ly if you have a clunky URL. But I thought with today's group today, having my name and online teaching was probably pretty manageable. For students though, you may end up making it even shorter. Most of them are comfortable with QR codes now too. So you make it easy for them to get on there. You go in and you check that it's working. The first time they use it, it's pretty intuitive, but you might explain to them how to use it and show them via a shared screen. And then it becomes quite a useful tool for them to use. And there's different layouts. You can do it more like a mind map or more like kind of squares, kind of flowing information. What was the other, sorry, there was another technology that there was a question about.
The polling tools like Kahoot.
Yeah. So there's really basic polling tools. So things like, I think Doodle poll is a really basic free one you can use, or you can use tools like Kahoot, which allow you to have a bit more gamification. So you can set that up fairly easily with Kahoot. It's free. It's 4 questions that you usually have in there, and then the students pick which one, and it's timed, and they also get like a nice sort of leaderboard, which is quite fun for them, so they can see who's getting things the most right out of stuff. So if you do have some things that you don't want a formal quiz, but you would like the students to engage with it and there's some clear right or wrong answers, then you can use a tool like that. And I guess one of the things particularly with the generation of students we have now, is they've grown up for many of them, not for all, sorry, there is still a bit of a digital divide, but a lot of them have grown up with these different technologies. Particularly they're very literate with things like gaming, and so if we can speak to them in spaces that they are comfortable with and enjoy, then again it's going to help motivate them more.
Just changing track now, I think we've got a couple minutes left. How to manage any issues around behaviour on Zoom or online?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it's the same stuff as in the real world. So you set your expectations clearly at the start. They know that within this online community there are rules, and they would be aware of that from other spaces they may engage with, and that if they transgress those rules, there's an outcome from that. So and they will, other members of the group will also raise queries if someone's kind of transgressing things. So you can do things like, if someone was being problematic, you could take away their voice, so you could mute them, you could hide their video, you could kick them out, but it's better if you can maintain things, you can maintain the expectations and guide them towards more appropriate behaviour. Obviously, if you have something like a Zoom bomber, which I haven't had in my classes, you could just eject them straight away. But I think it's just similar to what you would do in a standard offline environment, is to go, are they following what the code of conduct is in the space? If not, clearly articulating to them how they're breaching it, giving them an opportunity to address their behaviour, and if they continue to breach it, then removing them from the environment. So yeah, sorry.
Hi. I just wanted to add to that. I had an example of that with one of our Aboriginal content sessions in IT, one of the IT courses, and we had a student who gave smart answers to questions.
Yep.
So we gave, oh no, I think it was actually looking at academic integrity and using sources. That was the one. And we put examples up and we asked the students to grade them and say why. And so in the chat, one of them would give what looked like a high distinction example, a fail, and then a fail, a high distinction.
Yep.
So yeah, that wasn't very funny at the time, but it is in the retelling, because what happened with that student is that people just ignored, all the other students just ignored them, and they stood out as just playing the fool. So there's one small example.
That's a really good example, and it's lovely to see you as well. Hello. Yeah, I think it is that thing that the students that are there, they are there to learn. Like, they're not really here to waste time. They're under a lot of time pressure. So if someone's subverting that in ways that are just really annoying, then they're going to push back at that. Even things like yesterday with the student that was in the library, they were getting a lot of background sound, and so students kept saying, "Can you please mute your mic?" And the student apologized and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the library. That's just why there is this sound, and I'll only have my mic on if I'm asking a question." But exactly that thing you're talking about, where the group says this is problematic for us, it's problematic for our learning, and so then we can work together to fix it. And in that example, it wasn't, this student wasn't trying to be deliberately problematic. It was just by nature of situation that anytime he tried to do anything and turn on his mic, there was stuff in the background that he couldn't control. So yeah. Cool. Any other questions, Sarah?
Well, it is 1:30, so maybe we should call the formal end to our session. And thank you again, Jennifer, for a wonderful presentation that I think I have to admit I was quite terrified about moving online. So I feel very lucky to have a colleague like yourself. And it's been really wonderful that so many people have logged on today. Jennifer, are you able to put up that final slide that just does a little plug for the upcoming webinars as well? So the branch chairs have been meeting, and we have put together, as I said earlier, a series of webinars. So these are the upcoming webinars. The links will be available via the HERDSA site. So just keep an eye out for any promotion for those. And yeah, we look forward to kind of retaining a sense of community of practice amongst each other. And I look forward to seeing everybody online across the coming months. So thank you.
Thank you. If I could just add one final note, I think, as a lot of critical theorists show or discuss, education is about hope, and a lot of what we're doing in this time is providing students with a hope for a better future in a really negative context, more broadly globally. So don't underestimate the power of what you're doing. Don't worry too much about the technology. Just do your best to be there and to teach and to help them learn. That's what they really care about.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.